Welcome to the Mum CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach. Join me as we explore the dynamic intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. From the challenges to the triumphs, we're here to unravel it all. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical wisdom, and a whole lot of inspiration. Let's embark on this empowering journey together. Hello, I'm your host, Esther Roach, and today I'm joined by Georgia. Hello, Georgia, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Now, it's a pleasure having you. For the benefit of the audience, would you like to introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Georgia. I'm a special educational needs specialist, and I run a company called Sennies. And we basically help families mostly, but also work with businesses, local authorities, schools, you name it, to support them with recruiting different types of SEND childcarers and also supporting with different types of training and support packages to just make sure that everybody can be more inclusive in their approach and that children have what they need to thrive.
Oh, fantastic. And I know, you're already a mum, but you're expecting another one. How's that going with business and
Yes.
everything else?
So we're getting ready for two under two. Luckily, it will only be a couple of months, but I'm sure it's going to be a crazy ride. Yes, it's going well. And I think what I tried to do as an entrepreneur is to set up my life and my business in a way that allows me to be both. I can't be them both at the same time, the CEO and mum. But I do have a really good work-life balance that we've kind of worked towards before we made this choice to have children. So it's been quite an exciting time for us.
Well, it is, and you've had quite a lot of things happening because I met you at the Woman Who Awards, which was incredible. I got to sit with you. Little did we know that you were going to be a winner. Tell us a little bit about how that experience has been for you and what's sort of been happening around the Sennies world as a result of your award.
So that was incredible. We found out about the awards this year actually and put in an application, and there was no part of me that thought we'd win. I don't really know how awards work. I hadn't really applied to anything like that before. But what was so amazing about it, I think, for me was being able to reflect on all the things we've done in the 5 years since opening Sennies. And then you kind of realize how much you've contributed towards society and the community, especially when you're working in an industry such as special educational needs. It has to come from passion. So I myself have ADHD. A lot of my family are neurodivergent, mostly autism and ADHD sort of runs in our bloodline as such. And as much as I don't like the word high functioning because it does kind of put down on the struggles that you have when you are neurodivergent. But I was diagnosed as an adult because I was able to mask a lot of my difficulties in school. They did know that I potentially had ADHD, but there wasn't necessarily a need at the time to be diagnosed. So to be able to actually take a step back as someone who's so impulsive and always wanting to go, 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 and look at what we've done in the 5 years since being opened, and then hearing that kind of be read back to you when you win an award, especially at Women Who, where they're so eloquent with their words and that it's such a lovely environment surrounded by other women who are doing amazing things in lots of different spaces, was just incredible. And I was not prepared. I was stuffing my face with biscuits when they called my name. I remember just being really flustered going up to get my award, but honestly, it was one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever had. And I've now decided to sponsor next year's awards just because I hope that we can obviously encourage other people to apply and have that same feeling.
Wow, that's amazing. But what I loved as well is you got to share that experience with your mum.
Yes, yeah. So she's a director in my business. I employed her after a couple of years of opening. She's also got ADHD. She was diagnosed last year. There's a big sort of hereditary link, and I think she noticed certain things in herself that we noticed in me. Again, high functioning, and she's managed massive NHS practices all over sort of the UK for years. So it manifests very differently for her, but it's really interesting to see that everyone who is neurodivergent is different, And I think that's kind of the message that I like to share with people is you can be successful. It doesn't look like, the friend of yours or the family person that you know. That's not the only type of autism or ADHD. It can come in many shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that because this is something that I hear a lot. So even on the show, I've had guests that are obviously in that sort of space, but they've also been diagnosed themselves. And it's really interesting how people can sort of box everybody and kind of say, because you haven't got this or you don't look like you have ADHD. And it's kind of like, what is your take on that and how do you educate people to sort of better understand, but also to learn that you don't treat, not everybody's is the same, basically. You don't treat them as a one size fits all, basically.
Yeah, well, I think historically a lot of the research was done on males. So that's why we're finding there's very long wait lists now for adult females and children in general, because it manifests very differently. And so the stereotype, should we say, for ADHD in particular would be an angry little boy who lashes out and has no control over his emotions and might be physical. But for females, and again, not all females, I don't want to generalize absolutely everyone, but for more so in females, we can internalize those things, and our hyperactivity can be in our mind, almost having lots of different tabs open at one time, not being able to finish certain things, intense friendships. There's so many new things that are being explored and studied. And also we're seeing a high number of successful entrepreneurs who have ADHD who may have not been diagnosed many years ago. Same with autism, a lot of inventors. I personally believe we wouldn't have, the theories and the science behind light and sound if we didn't have neurodivergent individuals. But it just wasn't as well known about back then. And I think what's really important, because I have some successful women saying, I think I may have ADHD and or autism, but I don't want to take up space because my struggles aren't as difficult as maybe someone with level 3 autism who might be non-verbal. But it's not about comparisons. As we say, we're all different. And if you are having any sort of challenges in your life, you deserve to maybe have some access to different types of support that you might not have been able to access without a diagnosis. There's not a blood test, it's not something that they can say, right, you definitely have it and you definitely don't. So it's really important to kind of look back at your childhood because it's something you are born with. It's not something you just develop over time. And if you can see sort of clear links, looking at all of the research instead of just some of the more challenging sort of studies that were taken, like I say, on people who might have been non-verbal for autism or maybe more aggressive with ADHD, then you're going to get a much better understanding of what it actually is rather than deciding it's only one type of thing. We call it the autistic spectrum because it, like I say, it can come in so many different shapes and sizes for different people. And if you are neurotypical, so you don't have any kind of neurodivergent needs, then the best thing you can do when someone says that they are or they think they are is ask questions and learn so that you have a better understanding about what it is for different people rather than assuming, I know this one autistic person, therefore I know exactly what it is. And that's something that we work with a lot with families. They might say, we need a Sennie, which is what we call our SEN child carers, and most of them are SEN nannies. But we don't think our child's autistic because they make eye contact, because they have friends. And we have to kind of re-educate people that those are not the only criterias for being diagnosed autistic. And a lot of children and adults learn how to mask. So they learn how to cope in a neurotypical world. And not every autistic person struggles with eye contact or communication as such. So it's about finding out what areas of support they need and then working with them as an individual.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that you kind of go back to almost basics, really, just to get that understanding going. Because obviously, from what happens, I think society hasn't particularly helped. And it's not always the kindest, regardless of what the situation is and everything. And unless people have that education, it's very difficult for them to kind of see things in a different way. And do you think, like, from your experience, do you feel like people don't say or try and understand themselves better because they don't want to have a label and they're sort of worried about what society might say to them?
Definitely, and it's something that resonates for me actually. So when I was in school, did my exams in the special educational needs room. it was clear I had ADHD. But there are lots of challenges in schools in terms of funding. So when you get an EHCP, an educational healthcare plan, the school has to put in the first £6,000 or £7,000 of funding, and some plans might only be £6,000 or £7,000 of funding, whereas other children with higher needs it might be 70,000. But as we know, schools are underfunded as it is. So in most schools' cases, not all, they do not want to put in applications for children whose needs are not high, and will try to support within the budget that they've already got, rather than having to specifically allocate that money to that child for resources or a one-to-one or something. But for me, when I was younger, I thought I wanted to be a teacher, and I'm also dyslexic and I have sensory processing challenges. I thought if I was diagnosed dyslexic or diagnosed ADHD, it would stop me from going down that path.
Right.
And it used to be that, if you were diagnosed ADHD, you may struggle to become a policeman. There were barriers in the way because of the stereotypes. I would see some of the more aggressive young boys in my class who did have EHCPs and had one-to-ones who were diagnosed ADHD and think, well, I'm not like them and I don't want to be put into that category. So I resonate with people who say, we don't want to give our child labels, or I don't want to give myself a label. But what I'm trying to do is re-educate people of what it can look like, which can be a successful female entrepreneur mother who is thriving. Yes, I have my challenges, of course, but there are workarounds. The challenges do not define me. And once I actually received that diagnosis, I was able to access better support, better therapy. I have a support worker to help me stay on task, which has helped, Sennies to really thrive, to make sure that I don't have all those tabs open and don't finish doing what I need to do. The therapist I work with is an ADHD specialist, and we kind of do coaching as well. So it's not about labels, it's about accessing support if you need it. I also take ADHD medication when I'm not pregnant, and that has been life-changing. And it's a controlled substance, it's a stimulant, so you cannot access that without a diagnosis. And whilst I don't think it's right to necessarily put all children with ADHD on that, and I'm in a way glad I didn't take it as a child, as an adult doing my degree, I wish I had access to it, because yes, I got a 2-1, but by the skin of my teeth, did I even finish university. I really struggled in ways that, now that I've seen how the medication works, could have enabled me to fulfill my full potential and not kind of struggle through that 3-year process. So yes, I empathize with people who talk about labels, but I think it's more important to understand ourselves than to think it's about a label.
Yeah, no, and there's so much I could unpick from all that you've mentioned. But what I want to, get from you is basically, how do you think one, as parents, should do to try and understand, or, how can they best frame their mindset around this, sort of ADHD, autistic sort of area, and also employers, because I think, you've got schools, I think you've got just loads of organizations, but it's just, how do people have to frame themselves, if that makes sense, in terms of employers or parents or schools, to best support people that are, that have ADHD or are dyslexic, or, any of those things that need that extra support. How can they best support without kind of giving labels?
So I think it's challenging when we talk about schools and employment, because what I have learned is there are some fantastic schools and there are some fantastic teachers in certain schools, and there are some fantastic companies which again come with fantastic employers, but people move on. So I could say, this company A is fantastic because Sarah is there and she understands how to support neurodivergent employees or parents even with neurodivergent children that might need more time off or flexibility to work from home to support their children. But if Sarah leaves, I can't necessarily say that company is still as neurodiversity friendly or disability friendly as it was when they had a good advocate in the building. So what we're trying to do at Sennies is we now work with a number of businesses to train all of the senior leadership team to better understand not only what it is to have an employee who might have a disability, whether that is neurodiversity or physical disability,
Mhm.
but also the parents of children where they may need more time to go to tribunals or to go to EHCP meetings, how they can be more flexible to retain amazing staff who are just having more challenges because of their child at that time, and not ostracize them or kick them out or make them feel less than, because it's not their fault at all. So yeah, I think it can be challenging with schools and businesses, but it can be done if they are willing to engage with the right training and make sure everyone is on the same page, not just one advocate. I see my ADHD, I've actually forgotten the other part of the question.
No, well, you've answered it, because it was employers, it was schools, and it was parents, and you've touched on all of that. So that's absolutely fine, because I just think, like what you mentioned there, rightly so, we as people, or even companies and businesses and stuff, they invest in various training. And I think that's really important to kind of train your staff so that they're well equipped to deal with certain things, because I feel like sometimes in certain situations, which I've spoken to other people that have really struggled, but they've not been able to speak up or speak to somebody at work to say, I'm dyslexic or I've got this problem, because they worry about their job. But I think if the training was sufficient and it wasn't seen as, a label, another label, people will react differently to it, and I think teams would probably perform better. That's my thoughts based on what I hear and what I see happening. I don't know what you think.
Definitely. I think if you as a company are very strict that things have to be done like this, you are going to waste neurodivergent and disability talents where people can think outside of the box.
Yeah.
That's why I open my own business, because I love being able to sort of chop and change how we might do things. Or if we hear that there's a new challenge that needs solving, we don't just say, oh, that's how it's always been done. I'm ready to sort of tie my boots up and get to work on how we can support a new area of special educational needs. I guess if you are applying to a role, it would be lovely to see more on job descriptions that they are open, or they encourage applications from people with disabilities of all sorts, because that would give people the confidence to disclose prior to. However, I do also understand not sharing your disability until you've got the job, because people are not given a role over someone else because of a stereotype, like we were talking about earlier, that they might be too forgetful, so that they're not going to take that person and they'll take the other person who doesn't have it all. But there are things like access to work which you can apply to once you do have a role, and that is government funded support to support you with your disability within the workplace. If it's a small business, then the government will just pay for it. But if it's a larger business, then the business pays and then they get reimbursed by the government. So they kind of look at how much money does the company have, but it is still funded by the government. And you'll work with someone who can go over different tech support that you could have, whether you need a support worker. And it varies, again, depending on the individual and what will help them with their role. It might even just be Grammarly if you're dyslexic, something that can just help with your spelling and your emails. So there are lots of sort of hidden things to support people with disabilities in the workplace that are just quite a well-kept secret, and we need to just scream and shout about it to make sure that everyone knows it exists.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what I was going to say to you, because where do people go and find this information? Because, it's, I haven't heard of that particular funding and stuff. And I think if businesses and companies were aware, they'll probably be more open to, hiring and, like you said, disclosing even on the job advert that they will consider anybody, and, the different disabilities and stuff like that. Where can people find that information? And is it more an individual that has to look for it, or is it more the companies that have to look into this?
It should be the companies as well as the individual, but the reality is with anything to do with SEN and disability, it's a fight. And so even when you apply to something like access to work, it'll probably take about a year before any support is actually put in place. There are delays, there are funding cuts, there is constant tribunals in every area, where one piece of advice I give to anyone, whether it's for themselves or if they're advocating for their child, is you fight for what you are entitled to. You fight, because at every avenue they might try and tell you, no, sorry, you don't qualify, and you are given the right to appeal. the the rejection rates are so high because I think they're trying to save money and they don't think people have the energy, which most people don't, to appeal. But the success rate by the time you get to tribunal is so high, and at that point you're actually meeting with specialists and professionals, whereas in the very early stages it's just, you know, Bob from down the road who actually knows nothing about your disability that is sort of going, computer says no. And I don't know why they make it so difficult, but that's again kind of what we do at Sennies when we support families, because it can be so exhausting and it's so easy to give up. But with the right support and kind of hearing from one of our specialists who might take on some of that paperwork for you or might collate some of that evidence, because our team know what they're doing. They've done this for lots of families. Let's say if it's for an EHCP, it just takes that load when you've already got so much as a parent going on and you're dealing with, you know, whatever's happening in the household as well. So fight is what we always say. You know, if you know you are entitled to that support, you keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, because, you know, when I hear it can take up to a year, already somebody will give up before they've even started the process, you know,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like, it's almost like seems to be the system is that way in order to stop people sort of applying and following through and doing it. But like you said, you know, you guys are set up to support those families and everything. And how can they work with you and how can they find you and sort of, you know, what is the process basically if anybody wanted to work with Sennies?
So we've got a website, www.sennies.co.uk. You can reach out to us on info@sennies.co.uk. And everything we do is bespoke. So again, when we're talking about families, businesses, schools, as much as we have some sort of like, okay, here's a package, the main thing what we want to do is actually speak to you as a business or as a parent and find out what it is you're hoping to achieve or what it is you're struggling with. We then, if it's something that one of our internal specialists can handle and they're the right person, then we will put a package together and give you a quote and kind of work with you on that. A lot of the time, the packages as well, it's having a disability is more expensive than not having one. That's why PIP, you know, personal independence payments exist. So if someone says, look, we can't afford that, then we can reduce the package. And that's why having a bespoke package is better. Here's everything we can do, but you let us know which part of it sort of sits within your budget. Same for businesses. And I think it's much better than an online course that comes out of the box. Yes, we are working on having some more accessible, cheaper online courses, but you see so many, you know, this one's accredited, this one's CPD, and you'll get to the end of that 20, 30, £100 course and it hasn't answered your questions because as an individual, what you're going through is very different to maybe what someone else was going through. You don't want an out of the box, what is autism course. We need to know how to support your family in the situation that you're going through. And that's the same for businesses. I think when they take on disability training, they just purchase a quick online course, tick that box. And the businesses that we've been working with, so our latest client is actually TUI, and it's all been bespoke, and we have trained all of their childcare staff so that they can offer inclusive holidays. So when your child goes to the kids club, there are going to be people there who fully understand how to support and engage with your child. No, they're not SEN experts, but they've had the training that is specific to, you know, the challenges that they may face in their environment, not just what is autism, what is ADHD. And we've got a 3-year partnership with them. So any company that is sort of willing to invest in something a bit more bespoke is not just doing a tick box exercise. They are actually working on the challenges that they are facing. And again, same for families. So anyone can just get in touch via email or calling us from the number on the website. We'd book in a call and go from there to see how we can support.
No, that's fantastic. And there is a lot, you know, you see a lot of the tick box exercise because it's like, yeah, this is done. And I think that explains why there's so many as well. On the other hand, there's some that are really good and sort of well equipped to deal with these things, but some are not, and they've got no idea how they'll even deal with it. So it's you know, it's a great thing that you're able to sort of tailor things and make it bespoke to support as many as you can. And tell me a little bit about how it's like working with your mum.
It's amazing. Like, she is my best friend, but I think what's quite funny about the situation, how we support other families, is you're, in most cases, not all, your mum or your dad, you know, or your main caregiver is your safe space. And one thing we see, and from my personal experience of being a Sennie before I opened the company, I'd work with families and the children might be really horrible to their mum, but their mum is doing everything right. You know, they're not, it's not that I'm doing something magical. It's just that because if a child or a person has been masking all day or just trying to fit into a neurotypical world, when they get in that safe space with the safest person, sometimes you can just unleash. So my poor mum still gets that. I'm in my 30s, you know. Sometimes I'm like, just go away. And she's like, oh, why are you so mean to me? So, and I don't mean to be, but she is my safe space. She is my person. And I think we've built up a really good relationship where we'll have like a little buzzword if I'm starting to be a bit ratty just because she is my safe person. We can then start laughing about it nice and quickly. But it does make quite good entertainment, I think, for the office because there's certain ways we'll speak to each other or again, both having ADHD, we'll just start being like la 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 la, start dancing or singing or doing something weird, and everyone else in the office is like, "Are you two okay?" I think they're so immune to it now that they just carry on. So it is a blessing, I think, to have her there and to know as well that she will always have my back in any situation. Because when I had my daughter, 3 months in, we had two members of staff and we're quite a small team, but the head office team, they handed in their notice on the same day. So I had to return full time to work way before I was ready to. I was happy to do part time, but I was sort of back in the office with my newborn. And it was that moment of thinking, thank goodness for my mum, because she is the one person who would never, ever leave me in a situation where I might have to close the company down. You know, she, even if it was just her on her own, she would keep it going because we know how many hundreds of families we're supporting. So it's an absolute blessing having her.
Oh wow, it sounds like an incredible relationship. And like I said, I saw you, and your mum is such a lovely person as well. And I was lucky enough to sit with both of you. We'd never met before, but we sat together, had a good chat, which was really brilliant. And to top it up, you won the award. What would you say to anybody who's thinking of entering awards? What is sort of your advice if somebody has a bit of imposter syndrome and they're a bit worried about entering the award arena, basically?
So I would always advise working with an award specialist. So I worked with someone called Emma Hewitt, and she's incredible. And she doesn't write the application for you. She supports you in writing winning answers. So she looked up all the different awards that would be relevant to my business because it's very overwhelming. And I think there are some awards that make you maybe pay for a trophy and they're not real in a way. And so I was overwhelmed to know, where do I start? Which ones are actually good awards that are not just trying to make money and mean something? And where will I meet other amazing entrepreneurs that I can network with, even if I don't win? So she came up with an awards calendar and we kind of put together a Word document that meant when I apply to awards, I can kind of use the answers. They're quite similar questions on different sort of applications, but it was money so well spent having someone support in that area, because some of the answers I was writing, she was like, I understand what you're saying and why you're saying it, but I don't think that's what they're asking, especially when you have ADHD and we waffle on, So she just helped me to really round it up and bring it up. I think one of the questions was, what was one of your biggest challenges? And I mentioned COVID, and she was like, well, that was everyone's challenge. And then, I mentioned about what happened with the staff members leaving. And she was like, that is a personal challenge to you. And that is a big deal. You went back to work with a 3-month-old in tow and stuff. So, yeah, I would say definitely work with someone who knows the space and who will support you in not feeling like an imposter. Because when I was talking to her about it, I was like, wow, we have done amazing things, and it is worthy of an award, and hopefully someone else might think that. And we're also now finalists in the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, which is
wow,
nice.
fantastic, congratulations.
Thank you.
No, I know Emma, and she's absolutely incredible. She's amazing. And like we said, because you can waste a lot of time, but what I also like you mentioned even earlier, that with entering awards, it helps you to sort of reflect and look at what you've actually done, because sometimes I think we don't give ourselves enough credit. You kind of don't really see that. And for like I'm a mom of 5, and when I'm talking and saying, oh yeah, I just do this and stuff like that, and everybody's like really like they're so overwhelmed for me at the fact that I have 5 children. But in my head, it's like, oh yeah, it's normal. That's my life. This is what I do, you know. But it's sitting down and actually reflecting and seeing what you've done and what you've achieved, which is really incredible. You know, have you got any sort of tips or advice that you want to leave the audience with?
My biggest tip to anyone who's looking to maybe start a business or is a mum would be to fail fast. That's something I say to everyone. If you have an idea, don't sit and procrastinate on it. Get going. How can you bring it to market as quickly as possible in a safe way? Obviously, you don't want to be bringing any old tut out, but you know, how can you get it up and running? Because what my business was on day one compared to what it is now has grown through learning in the role and learning what your customers and your clients want and need, and it can develop over time. I've seen many entrepreneurs never actually get an idea off the ground because they think it has to be perfect, which I understand when you maybe have a product and that can take a lot longer because you need to get a lot of sign off. But if it's a service that you're offering, get started. And also my second piece of advice would be, even if you think it's worth £100, start lower, like Uber did. Be the Uber. And then once you've proven the value, you can increase accordingly. But it should never be all about money. We prioritize people over profits all the time. You know, it needs to be something that comes from the heart, I think. Otherwise you'll just get bored of it and want to stop or go on to the next thing. So those would be my 3 top tips.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's incredible tips as well, because I think sometimes it's like you said, even the money side and everything else, it's kind of like you have to have a concept that works. You know, people have to need whatever you're providing. But equally, if you as a person don't have enough passion in what you're doing, it will show. It's not gonna be brilliant, because you're kind of like, and you're also not gonna enjoy it. So absolutely brilliant tips and advice. You know, thank you so much, Georgia, for being on the show today. And you've just shared some really incredible stuff, which I think will benefit a lot of the audience, whether it's companies, individuals, or families, which is absolutely great. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
You know, it's a pleasure.